Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about something that is on the minds of a lot of people, especially young people, and that is how to pick the right major in college. Before I start, I want to take this opportunity to ask you for a like, a share, or a subscription to my YouTube channel. I would appreciate any little help I can get to work with those little algorithms out there. Let's dig in. So today, when it comes down to trying to figure out what you're going to do at college, it's an age-old question. It's not something that's new, and one of the biggest problems that we've kind of done as a society is really amp up the pressure about such a question. Now, this is, again, like I said, it's a question that people have been asking themselves for a long time. What do I do when I go to college? And we have made it very clear in previous episodes, and also as a society, we've really pushed this idea that you need to go to college. You need to know exactly what you're going to do. And these two things are very dangerous to push in the minds of young people. Because again, when you're 15, 16, start thinking about college, the idea that you're going to know exactly what you want to do for the rest of your life is ridiculous. I mean, let's be blunt. It's just ridiculous. Now, there are lots of people out there who do know, and that's perfectly fine. But they have a good sense. I like this. I want to do this. I want to pursue this. But the idea of a society that we tell people that they must know, that is a great hindrance to young people. And quite frankly, it's where you start seeing a lot of money get wasted at college. So when someone is starting to look for a college, when they start to think about the idea, again, 15, 16 years old, somewhere in that sophomore, junior year, and they start thinking, well, college isn't really that far away. I should start looking. Great. And as we've discussed before, make sure first and foremost that you need to go to college and that you want to go to college and that you're the kind of person that would benefit from going to college. So if all those are in your favor and it's time to pick a major, what should you pick? There's a good question in that. Now, typically whenever you have the branch of decision making, it comes down to money versus, desires, dreams, hopes, all that kind of a thing like that, your interests. And ideally, they're both kind of on the same path. But the thing is there's a lot of pressure of students going to colleges. Will this make money? And that's a good legitimate question to ask, because if you're looking at college like a business that I should get a return on my investment, then by golly, I'm going to make sure I get a good product from this company. But the truth of the matter is the idea of college as a business fails when people think of it as the education is the product. In the reality, the students are the product and society is the customer. So the college is producing product, these students who are going to be given to society to do good work and keep society chugging along generation after generation after generation. So that's the best way to think of college, is the student is the product. That said, so if I look at the idea of what makes money, that's one way to look at how I choose a major. And you can look online and find tons of different resources about which majors earn what kind of money. And if you're chasing that, you'll find that list and it'll be beneficial to you. Now, where it's not beneficial, obviously, the very first thing is, it puts the focus purely on money. And that's never a healthy attitude to have, that you're focused purely on money. That very rarely turns out well. I mean, yeah, you might end up with lots of money, but most people lack the one thing that comes along with that, and that's contentment, not happiness. I mean, you can if with enough money, you can buy things that make you happy, but contentment, it's not there. It disappears because you're always seeking money, and therefore there's always more to be had, and you're never content with the things that you have. Now, this is not a video to shame having money. It's perfectly okay to have money and to use it well. But remember that the love of money, not money itself, the love of money is the root of all evil. So you have to be very, very careful if you're just chasing money. The other problem that comes with that of chasing money is you just might not have interest in the thing. So you pick a major that's going to just put the money in your pocket, and you end up deciding, maybe it's during your studies, maybe it's shortly after graduation, maybe it's 10 years down the road, that you really don't like this at all. And that's where you've dedicated your entire life and focus to doing that kind of a thing, and you just don't like it. And that's a hard thing to deal with, because if you're in college and you come to the realization, I don't like my major, that freaks students out, because they think they know what they're doing, and all of a sudden it's gone, and that freaks them out. The other thing too is if it go down the road, like say 10 years after college, and they realize they don't like what they're doing, that's terrifying, because now you have dedicated a sizable chunk of your life, 1/8, 1/9 of your life towards this one goal, this one career focus, and all of a sudden it's gone because you don't want to do that anymore, because it's just not satisfying or fulfilling. What are you going to do now? So you have that kind of problem that comes into play, and with the idea of chasing it on the concept of going after money. Now, as I said before, going after money is going after a degree that will earn you a usable income is not in and of itself any kind of a problem. It is important to earn your own way to make money, to survive, and to be a good member of society. So it is important to be mindful of that. Also, as expensive as college is, you need to be mindful. Can I pay back what I am going to invest in this? So if you just take loans for everything and build up all that student loan debt, you're going to walk out of college with $100,000 to $200,000 in debt. Can I legitimately pay this off? And by making a good bit of money, you pay it off reliably, quickly, all that good fun stuff. So those are things that are important to consider. On the other side, if you look at the concept of interest, what do I want to do with interest when it comes like this? What do I like to do? And that's very common when students say, hey, what do I want to do? And they start thinking, I like doing this, and they start looking at colleges. They look at the list of all the majors at a college, and they say, that one looks exciting, or that looks fun, that looks cool, that one's right up my alley, things that I like to do, and pursue that. Of course, you've always heard the adage, if you love what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, there's been plenty of times where I've genuinely enjoyed what I was doing, and it didn't feel like working. Like when it comes to teaching, we have a joke inside academia, we teach for free, but they pay us to grade, because the teaching part is fun. I mean, we get to study the stuff that interests us. We get to talk to other people about what interests us. What a cool job that is. So I get all day, I just to stand up and talk about stuff that's interesting to me, and I get paid for it. What a deal. But when the end of the semester comes and I have to do all the grading, that's such a slog to go through all that part. So that's where the money really comes in, because like I would teach for free, but when it comes time to grading, no thanks. You better pay me to grade. So that's the part of the idea of the interest. So I love teaching, and it doesn't ever really feel like work when I'm teaching. So there's a lot of truth to that in the things you do, but there's of course pros and cons of this as well. A con, for example, I used to be a DJ. Years ago when I was still in college, I actually worked in radio. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed being a DJ. You get to pick out songs, you get to take listener requests, you get to play all kinds of music. It was kind of fun. It paid minimum wage. That's not exactly very fun, whenever you're like, hey, this is a lot of fun. Now with being a DJ, especially in the era when I was doing it, the early mid 90s, there was still some amount of radio stations out there. Well, now they're pretty much all gone. Most radio stations are just computer controlled. And that's what actually happened to me. My very first radio station I worked in, a bigger radio station bought us, fired everybody, and replaced us with a computer. So that was the start of the downfall of radio. So obviously that wasn't fun. But doing the DJ work was actually fun. And, I would have done that, but I would have to try to go and hop to bigger stations, eventually ending up in a large metro market like Pittsburgh or Cleveland, or something that was larger, or a really big market, like eventually you could get into something like a New York or an LA or Chicago. But I mean, those are so few people can get into that. So you're left hoping that you can get into maybe a small big market like Pittsburgh or Cleveland or something like that. But again, those stations now, they're hardly run by people. They're mostly run by computers too. So, that all disappeared. But getting a chance to hop into one of those stations is so slim. So the odds of getting there is next to nothing. So I knew really early I would be stuck. And I would be absolutely stuck making minimum wage or slightly above. And you just can't, raise yourself, let alone raise a family on that kind of money. So I left radio. I actually left radio because I started writing commercials, and I enjoyed the commercial writing too. So I got, a job being a marketing communication writer. So I started doing that instead on a corporate level. So we can find all these different things that we like, but will they pay the bills? And we have to be honest about that. And we have to have an honest assessment of that. And it's one of those things that we wrestle with because it's something we would love to do. But sometimes those things are best left as hobbies. And that's the next thing I want to talk about too, is sometimes you have something you love doing and you think, I'm going to major in this, I'm going to focus on this. But then it turns out, you know what? I like doing this as a hobby, but not as a career. Like, for example, I love cooking. I grew up without a father, so I'd come home, typical Gen X latchkey kid, come home, my mom's at work. So if you're going to eat, you got to figure out how to make some food. And now my mom likes cooking too, so I pick up a few things here and there, practice on my own. And next thing you know, boom, I'm cooking. And I love cooking. I would never want to open a restaurant though, because it would ruin it for me. Because I like cooking for myself, for family, for friends, and it's something that's a way to show hospitality, and it's a really neat thing to cherish. Now, as soon as I have paying customers in, they have expectations, they have time limits, and I have to meet all of those things. I have to follow all these state and federal guidelines about how to run my restaurant and everything. What a hassle. I would start to hate cooking. And no, let's keep that in the area of hobby, and let's focus on something else instead. So interests, do have some negatives as well. Obviously, they've got lots of pros. The idea that you're doing something you genuinely love. It is so much easier to go to work if you genuinely love what you're doing. Even when there's bumps, even when there's bruises. I mentioned earlier about grading time. Those are bumps and bruises times because, you get to look at final exam scores and you get to cheer when your students do really well. Like I knew they would do it, but then you see some students do very poorly and it breaks your heart because you're thinking, I know you were listening. I thought you were listening, and we've spent 16 weeks and it looks like you didn't learn a thing. And, I know you could have done better, and it breaks your heart. So you take this wins and the losses, but at the end of the day, I still enjoy and love doing the work. So having, something that you love to do is very important. So that's something to focus on and think about too. Is this something I'm going to enjoy doing long term according to the rules of the career, and be able to follow those rules and still enjoy doing that work? And will it pay me enough money to be able to continue doing those things? And then another thing to think about too is just flat out availability. So you have the money side of things, you have the interest side of things, but really what also comes down to is the availability of jobs. So you find a college that has a degree, cool, and you go and visit, and they've got really cool facilities, cool professors, everything looks good, great. But is there an availability of a job when you leave? Like I remember I'd have students who maybe they wouldn't like communication. They like working with people, but they want to do more things like helping people. So maybe they go look at social service positions. Well, the problem is there are a lot of people who are flooding the market to do social services work. Well, the starting job might be only a $30,000 a year job. I mean, that's not much money in today's world, but that's because there are so many people that are out there doing it, and there's such there's not this huge need. So as a result, they don't have to pay as much. And a lot of it's also government funded, so the pay is sometimes cut back from there. So there just isn't a high demand for that kind of a thing. So that will affect things. If you want to be a professor, you got to realize that, there are only so many, there are a lot of colleges, and every college is hiring all the time, but are they hiring specifically for you? Like, for example, for me as a communication professor, there might be there might be 200 to 300 communication professor jobs across the country at any given time. 200. I mean, that doesn't sound like a ton. I mean, it does if you're just thinking of you and yourself. Well, 200, I've got a great opportunity. Not if there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of other people looking for those same jobs. So now 200 sounds like a very small number. And then when you start pairing out things like, say, they're looking specifically for a graphic design one. Oh, I could do that mostly. Oh, here's someone looking for a filmmaker. Well, that's not my thing at all. So, here's someone who's looking for health communication. Oh, that's not really my thing. Here's sports communication. Yeah, I've done some of that. That might work. And by the time you start figuring out they're looking for these specific things, the specific thing you're looking for, there might be, say, maybe 50 jobs nationwide for that position. Yikes. I mean, that can be really disconcerting, and it's really hard. You get out of college and you don't know what you're going to do because there aren't many positions open, so you start applying and then you don't know, well, I hope I'll get accepted by one of these, and you don't because you're brand new, you don't have experience yet, so then you end up picking something else like working at Starbucks just to make ends meet, and then you start feeling that lament of, why did I pick that major because I can't find a job. That's something you really need to be thinking about. Are there jobs in this field? And, because again, the money, the interest, those things are very important, but can I even get a job with it? Ends up being the big thing. And that's important because who cares about the money if there's no job? You won't be able to, if you don't have a job, you're not going to make the money, and you're not going to express your interest if you can't find the position that's open. Now, that's also a little bit hard because you don't know in 4 years from now. So you're starting, well, actually, if you're a sophomore in high school, you enter college 2 years, 3 years from then, and then 4 years after that. So in 7 years, what will the market look like? I mean, you're not Nostradamus. You're not going to figure that one out. So that's a little bit difficult. All you can do is look at trends and see, how's this job doing? How's it performing? And then, a thing that ties in with that, too, is the concept of things like AI. How is AI going to affect this particular career field? So people who want to do something that's like writing, we need good quality writers in the world, but AI is threatening those jobs because AI does, what most people call good enough writing. And if you're a company and you can save $60,000 a year by not hiring the writer and having AI do it for you, and it does good enough, well, they'll take the good enough, and that's difficult to swallow, but that's the way that AI is transforming the job market. So you need to be asked, is this something that AI is threatening? And if it's still something I want to do, can I do this and study this in such a way to make it AI proof? So I know, like, whenever I teach my classes, I'm always teaching my students, you need to understand not just the how to do something, but the why. Because the AI doesn't know the why. It's never going to know the why. It's just going to know how. So you need to know the why of doing something. That way AI won't take your job from you. So those are the different aspects that we want to be thinking about when it comes down to picking a major. The last thing I want to focus on are the good old undeclared folks. These are the folks that are close to my heart because I was an undeclared major as well. I wanted to be an architect more than anything, and then I took trigonometry, and that just blew up all my dreams. And then I went into college undeclared. I had no idea what to do. My advice to you, if you want to go to college, if you know you want to go to college, if you are ready for college, but you're undeclared, don't let that deter you. Again, society says you must know, you must know, you must know. No, you don't. You don't. Go to college, and as I've said in the previous episode, you got all those general studies classes for your core for a liberal arts degree. Start checking off those boxes, and it's a variety of courses. So you might take a history course, an art course, a comm course, English course, your science, your math, and next thing you know, you're taking like a little sampling of all these different courses. You're going to find stuff that makes you go, this is really cool, or oh gosh, never that again. Like one of my first classes was macroeconomics. Nope, done. That was not for me. But I took a radio class with a buddy of mine who was on the drum line because he said, hey, take this class with me. I'm like, okay, fine. So I took this radio class, and it was a lot of fun. I loved working with radio. Well, that's how I got into radio. I started working in radio. So it was just one of those things of what is out there. Well, try things. The world's your oyster, as they say. Try a bunch of different classes and see what one really calls to you. It's not really too terribly difficult to find one that does call to you. And sooner or later, you're going to land on that one. Now, if you get to be a junior and you're still undeclared, that's obviously a red flag. You should start focusing on having some kind of discipline to see what are areas that you should start pursuing. But your freshman year is a chance to see how well do I know myself? How well do I know what I'm trying to do, where I'm trying to go, what I'm trying to be? And there's nothing wrong with checking and finding that those things out through trying different courses. Because the idea that everyone should know, it's a fallacy, because number one, most people change majors 3 to 5 times while in college, which sounds a lot, but that's typically what happens, because they get into a major and decide, I actually don't like this, and they change. So 3 to 5 times they'll change majors. And then once they get out into the world, most people will change careers, not jobs, careers 3 to 5 times. So, the idea that at 16 you have to know everything exactly how you're going to live until you're 72 and get to retire, that's bogus. Don't fall trap to that. Don't fall victim to that and think I have to know. Again, know yourself first. Start thinking about the money question. Start thinking about the interest question. Start thinking about the availability question. And then from there, you'll land on a major and it'll be okay. But take one that is, pick a major that's going to work well for you in the long term. Yeah, I could definitely see myself doing this for 30 or 40 years in case you stick with it, and actually give it the old college try, give it the go, and don't be afraid when the bumps and bruises come. Every major will have bumps and bruises, so just keep rolling with it and see how it all turns out. You can always change majors if you don't like the one you're in. It's no big deal. But again, figure out how to answer those 3 directional questions and move from there. That's what I have for you today. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I greatly appreciate that. If you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. I'm glad you stuck around this long. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.